Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. I am so excited to get into today's video because today I'm going to be talking to you about the 4 best books I have read this year. They are all Greek mythology retellings, so I'm going to be rating and reviewing them and just telling you a bit about why I like them so much. Don't worry if you haven't read any of these books, although I'm sure you will, because I genuinely feel like most of the world has read these books by this point and I'm very slow. I'm very late to the game. But don't worry if you haven't read them, there's going to be no spoilers here. I'm just going to be giving you brief synopsises of them and telling you a bit about why I like them. This was very much my introduction into the world of Greek mythology, so it's not going to be a lesson in Greek mythology. We're not going to get caught up on which god is what and who's related to who or whatever. It's just about the books and what they're about and why I like them. So grab yourself a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, your beverage of choice, and let's get into it. Okay, so the first book I'm going to talk about is called Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. This book was out in 2011 and I genuinely cannot believe that is when this book was out. It feels to me like this book was out a couple of years ago, but it's actually over 10 years. This book takes us from the very start of the Trojan War all the way through to the end, which lasts about 10 years. And it is the tragic love story between Achilles and his lover Patroclus. I have heard various pronunciations of this, and just a warning, I guess, my pronunciations of Greek names could be very off on all of these, but we're calling him Patroclus. So it is told from Patroclus's perspective, and I feel like most of us, even if we don't know anything about Greek mythology, we're kind of aware of who Achilles is, but just in case you don't know, Achilles is a demigod, so he is half human, half god, and he is one of the most famous warriors, Greek warriors in Greek mythology. He's blessed with godlike strength, and he's a really prominent figure in the Battle of Troy. So this book, as I said, it is a tragic love story, and that is honestly the main reason why I love this book so much, because the love story between Achilles and Patroclus, which I should say is a great LGBTQ plus representation. Patroclus is a man as well, and the love story is just absolutely, it's just beautiful. Honestly, I am not a big fan of love stories in general. I do not read romance novels. If there is a love story in a book or a movie, it's usually for me the least interesting part of that book or movie. But in this case, this one hit different. Like, this one was just so beautiful. And I think what I loved so much about it was it didn't feel like an over the top, ridiculous love story, even though it is set in the world of Greek mythology where everything is so like fantastical and over the top and dramatic. This love story felt so natural and realistic. It was just an absolute joy to read. Patroclus and Achilles quite quickly become lovers at the start. So the relationship spans the whole length of this book, which obviously spans about 10 years. And you get to see not only Patroclus and Achilles mature and grow into men, but you get to see their relationship mature as well. And that is so relatable, especially for me as someone who's been in a relationship for 7 years now. You get this very real, naturalistic sense of what it's like to be in a long-term relationship, what it's like to see your partner's flaws and, choose to love them regardless, to support them during really difficult times. And obviously this is very heightened. I mean, Achilles is literally fighting in a 10-year-long war. So Patroclus always has to be there to, support him and try and ground him. And they don't always agree with what the other one does. It's just so real. It's so amazing to me how a book that is based on Greek mythology has such a true depiction of a love story. And as I said before, it is a great, or I think it is a great representation of an LGBTQ plus love story, because for me anyway, when I was reading it, I kept thinking, this is written the exact same way as it would have been if it was a straight romance, as if it was just a man and a woman. I didn't see any differences. I didn't feel like the author was trying to shy away from anything, or it was just the same. And I thought that was so beautiful, and it was just so charming, and I just loved it. Can you tell I love this book? Like, I really loved it. So I would give this book a 5 stars, honestly. If you haven't read it yet, which I'm sure you probably have, but if you haven't, I would highly recommend reading it. The next book we're going to talk about is called Circe. That is also by Madeline Miller, and it was released in 2018. I tried to do this video, by the way, talking about the books in order of release date, which I'm like, so organised of me. Circe was released in 2018, and Circe is the story of an outcast who becomes her own hero. So from a young age, Circe is shunned from her family because she doesn't really fit in. She's not as pretty as the rest of them. She doesn't seem to have any particular power or anything particularly interesting about her. So she is just really shunned and neglected by her family. She's actually given the name Circe because it means hawk, and her voice is supposed to be a bit scratchy and gravelly, and also she's just not as like aesthetically pleasing as the rest of the family. So they call her Circe to kind of sum up the way they feel about her, which I'm like, wow, harsh. But Circe actually discovers that she does have powers. She's actually a powerful sorceress or witch, if you like, and she ends up turning a human into a god right near the start of the book. And she also ends up cursing a nymph, which actually gets her exiled from her family, and she has to live on her own and fend for herself. This story is all about how she survives on her own, and I love it. I think it's a great example of a strong female character who doesn't need to be saved, who isn't waiting for someone to come and save her. She very quickly realizes that she is all she's got and she has got to make the best with it. And she slowly but surely enhances her powers. She gets to learn about herself. She becomes in tune with the nature and the animals around her. And she harnesses her natural powers so that she's able to protect herself, and not only protect herself, but thrive also on her own. I just love her. I honestly love her so much. For some reason, I felt I really related to this character, and I just found it a really, really inspiring story. And I loved that she was not the typical beautiful, charming sort of heroine, but she really just comes into her own and she just owns who she is and she embraces it. She's like, this is who I am, this is what I can do, I'm powerful, and ultimately she's free. She finds a freedom in being exiled in something that is seemingly so terrible at the start actually almost becomes a gift to her, because without that she probably wouldn't have harnessed her powers the way that she does. I think you can tell I absolutely adore this book. This is probably, no, this is definitely my favourite out of the 4 books I'm going to talk about today. I think she is the coolest female character I've read about in such a long time, and it was so refreshing to read about her. So it goes without saying that I would give this book a 5 stars. I would give it a 10 stars, a 20 stars. I want to read it again. It's one of those books pretty much as soon as I stopped reading it, I wanted to read it again, and that very rarely happens. I have some quotes that I want to share with you. So the first one is, I had walked the earth for 100 generations, yet I was still a child to myself. She's like learning about herself. It's all about her self-discovery. Oh, I love it so much. And the second quote is, I had been old and stern for so long, carved with regrets and years like a monolith. But that was only a shape I had been poured into. I did not have to keep it. So the third book I'm going to talk about, I actually have the physical copy. I don't have a physical copy of any of these other books because I read them on my Kindle whilst I was on holiday, but I do have this one, and it is Ariadne. So Ariadne is by Jennifer Saint, and it was released in 2021. And Ariadne is a story about a Cretan princess who is betrayed and ends up being abandoned by someone who she mistakenly put her trust in at the start of the book. But her story is really one about endurance and resilience. You know, she has all these obstacles in her way, she has all these kind of negative things that have happened to her, but she really is able to endure them and be resilient and make the best of what she has. Her story is really about personal growth and strength. Right at the start of the book, Ariadne's mother gives birth to a minotaur, which is a half bull, half human. That's a long story, but this story had actually been woven into Circe, which I had read previous to Ariadne, and I really wanted, like, I was excited to read Ariadne because I thought it was going to dive a lot more into that story of Ariadne's relationship with her brother or half brother, the Minotaur, but it didn't really do that as much as I was expecting. It kind of focused on her life going forward, which I still really, really enjoyed. I was just a little bit disappointed because I kind of wanted to delve a bit further into the Minotaur story. What was interesting about Ariadne and the way Jennifer Saint structured her books, it shifts perspectives. So you have Ariadne's perspective, and then it also goes to her sister's perspective as well. So it also shifts to her sister Phaedra's perspective, and I really enjoyed that because as someone that has 2 younger sisters myself, I really related to that relationship that the sisters have, and their paths really diverge at one point. They end up leading very, very different lives. And I just thought that was so, so interesting. So overall, I would give this book 4.5 stars. The only reason it's not a 5-star for me is because I did want a little bit more of the Minotaur story. And I also felt like the ending was a little bit rushed and a little bit anticlimactic. I don't really know what I was entirely expecting for the end, but I just remember at the end feeling a bit like, oh, that's it done kind of thing. But those are very, very minor points. I did really, really enjoy this book. It is absolutely beautiful. So yeah, I would highly recommend buying the actual book because it is absolutely gorgeous. And I do have a quote from Ariadne. So the quote I really liked from Ariadne is, I would not let a man who knew the value of nothing make me doubt the value of myself. We love that. If you're a feminist, you have to read all these books because the female characters are just... So the fourth and final book I'm going to talk to you about is called Elektra. That is also by Jennifer Saint, and that was released this year. So Elektra is the story of three women whose fates are all tied up in this one single curse. It's about betrayal, vengeance, and a very dysfunctional family, and it is also set during the Trojan War. As with Ariadne, Elektra also shifts perspective, so you get the perspectives of the three women. So you get Elektra, you get her mother Clytemnestra, and you get Cassandra. Now, I found it slightly confusing because of Cassandra and Clytemnestra's names beginning with a C and being kind of long. I just, for some reason, kept getting them confused, so I found that slightly confusing. I also kind of thought that the central character should have been Elektra's mother, Clytemnestra. I really hope I'm saying that name right. I thought she should be the central character because I just felt like it was more of her story and she was more prominent in it throughout. Elektra only really featured heavily in the book towards the end. And honestly, I just related to her mum more. I got why she was doing what she was doing. I was on her side. Was she perfect? No. Did she make some bad choices? Yes. But I just liked the mum character. So I kind of felt like it was more her story. I mean, it was all three of the women's stories, but I really just kind of felt like it was her story. I didn't really relate to Elektra. I don't think she was featured heavily in it enough, especially for being the title character. For me, that's just my personal opinion. So for that reason, I would give Elektra 4 stars. It is definitely worth a read, but I just think it's the least strong out of the 4 books that I've talked about so far. However, I do have a really good quote from Elektra. And again, I think this just sums up how kind of all of these books have a theme of like female empowerment and feminism and how they all kind of discuss the contradictions that we as women face. And this book especially talked about that. So the quote is, I realised that when I seen all the suitors clamour in the hall for Helen, I believed that they were there because they loved her, but I had been wrong. They hated her. They hated her because she was so beautiful and because she made them want her so much. Nothing brought them more joy than the fall of a lovely woman. They picked over her reputation like vultures, scavenging for every scrap of flesh they could devour. So that just gives you a flavour of how rich the writing and descriptions are in these books. If you haven't read any of them, oh my goodness, do yourself a favour and go and read them. Get them on your Kindle, go out and buy them now. You will not regret it. They are just wonderful, wonderful books. But in case it hasn't been obvious, I would say my favourite is Circe. I love her so, so much. But all of these books equally in their own right are just fantastic. I am so excited to read whatever comes next for these authors. I really hope that you enjoyed this video. If you want me to do more book reviews and more just kind of bookish content, then I am totally up for doing that. So if you want to see more videos like this, please leave me a comment below. Let me know if you've read any of these books or if you're now interested in reading them after hearing me talk about them. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye!